My name is Dame Catherine Weather, and I knew the exact moment my 40-year marriage ended. It wasn't when Malcolm's lips pressed against hers as he handed her the glass of water, his fingers lingering a moment too long on hers. It wasn't when he asked if I was feeling better, his voice carrying a concern that once would have warmed my heart. No, it ended 26 hours earlier, when I discovered the life insurance policy he'd taken out on me without my knowledge, a policy worth £5 million, with himself as the sole beneficiary. The paper had fallen from his briefcase when I'd moved it from the hall table, a simple accident that revealed a devastating truth. My husband of 4 decades, the father of my children, the man who'd stood beside me when I received my damehood for services to education, had secretly bet on my death. And from the documentation, it wasn't a recent decision. The policy was 3 years old, taken out shortly after my 62nd birthday. Now, as I accepted the water from Malcolm's outstretched hand, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my supposed illness. My fingers didn't tremble. My voice didn't waver. 40 years in academic administration, rising to become one of Britain's most respected university chancellors, had taught me how to maintain composure in the face of betrayal. "Thank you, darling," I said, taking a small sip. The water was cool and clean, likely drawn from the expensive filtration system Malcolm had insisted on installing last year. Had that been the beginning of his plan? Creating a water supply he controlled? The doctor said plenty of fluids, Malcolm reminded me, his silver-gray hair catching the late afternoon sunlight streaming through our bedroom window. At 67, he remained handsome, distinguished. The kind of man other women envied me for. If only they knew. I remember, I assured him, setting the glass down on my bedside table. "I'm feeling a bit better already." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Was that disappointment I detected? Or was my newfound suspicion coloring everything? "I'll let you rest," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "I've got that dinner with the Harises tonight, but I can cancel if you'd prefer I stay home." "No need," I replied. "Go enjoy yourself. I'll probably sleep most of the evening anyway." Once he'd left the room, I reached for my mobile phone, hidden beneath the pillow. My fingers moved swiftly, typing a message to the one person I knew I could trust implicitly. "Olivia, I need your help. It's urgent, but must remain absolutely confidential. Can you come to the house tomorrow morning after Malcolm leaves for golf?" My former assistant and dear friend of 30 years replied almost instantly. "Of course. 9:30? Perfect. Enter through the garden. Tell no one." I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through decades of memories, searching for signs I might have missed. Had I been blind all this time? Or had Malcolm changed? And, the most pressing question of all, what exactly was he planning? Sleep was impossible that night, though I feigned it when Malcolm returned from his dinner and slipped into bed beside me. I felt his gaze on my face in the darkness, studying me in a way that now seemed sinister rather than loving. When his breathing finally deepened into sleep, I opened my eyes, looking at the familiar profile of the man I'd thought I knew. Tomorrow, the investigation would begin. Tomorrow, I would start dismantling the life we'd built together, before he could end mine. Olivia arrived precisely at 9:30 the next morning, her silver bob gleaming in the spring sunshine as she slipped through the garden gate. At 68, she moved with the same efficiency that had made her invaluable during my 20-year tenure as university chancellor. I watched from the kitchen window as she navigated the stone path, her expression concerned but determined. I opened the door before she could knock. "Catherine," she embraced me quickly, scrutinizing my face. "You look dreadful. What's happened?" "Come in," I said, leading her through to the conservatory at the back of the house, the one room Malcolm rarely entered, preferring his wood-paneled study with its leather chairs and whiskey collection. "We need privacy." Once seated among my orchids and rare tropical plants, I handed her the life insurance document without preamble. Olivia had always appreciated directness. She scanned it quickly, her eyes widening. 5 million? And you didn't know about this? Not until yesterday. It fell from his briefcase. This is. She paused, searching for the right word. Alarming, especially given the size of the policy. And the fact that Malcolm has never shown interest in financial planning before, I added. I've handled our investments and insurance for most of our marriage. He's always been disinterested in such matters. Olivia handed the paper back to me, her professional demeanor giving way to personal concern. Catherine, forgive my bluntness, but we must ask the obvious question. Do you think he's planning to kill me? I finished for her. I don't know, but I intend to find out. I explained my strange illness of the past few days, the sudden dizziness, the uncharacteristic fatigue, the digestive discomfort that seemed to worsen after meals Malcolm prepared. I actually felt fine until Tuesday evening, after he made that special anniversary dinner, I said. He insisted on cooking himself, sent Maria home early. Have you seen a doctor? Olivia asked sharply. Yes, yesterday morning. They ran blood tests, but I didn't mention my suspicions. If something shows up, I want it documented without bias. Olivia nodded, understanding my strategy. What do you need from me? 2 things, I replied. First, I need a private investigator, someone discreet, thorough, and not connected to any of our social circles. Second, I need a solicitor specializing in financial forensics. Someone who can trace Malcolm's activities without alerting him. I can arrange both today, she assured me. But Catherine, if you genuinely believe he's poisoning you, I'm taking precautions, I assured her. No food or drink he prepares. I've been emptying the glasses when he's not looking, pretending to consume what he gives me. You should leave, Olivia insisted. Come stay with me until we know what's happening. I shook my head firmly. If I leave, he'll know I suspect something. If he is planning something nefarious, I need evidence before I confront him. Besides, I added, allowing a hint of the anger burning inside me to surface, there are other matters to attend to first. Olivia recognized the steel in my voice, the same resolve that had helped me navigate university politics and government funding disputes for decades. What are you planning? Justice, I said simply. But I need information before I can pursue it. I need to know if this life insurance policy is an isolated incident or part of a pattern. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. We spent the next hour outlining a strategy. Olivia would contact her connections and arrange meetings with both the investigator and the solicitor. Meanwhile, I would begin my own reconnaissance, carefully documenting Malcolm's behaviors, securing evidence, and most importantly, protecting myself while maintaining the appearance of normality. There's one more thing, I said as Olivia prepared to leave. I need access to funds that Malcolm can't trace or freeze. Most of our wealth is in joint accounts. How much do you need? Enough to live on for at least a year, plus sufficient resources for a thorough investigation. Perhaps £500,000 to be safe. Olivia didn't blink at the figure. She knew the scope of my wealth, most of it earned during my career and inherited from my family, rather than Malcolm's more modest income as a management consultant. I can arrange a private loan against your art collection, she suggested. The pieces are in your name alone, correct? Yes, they were mostly inherited from my parents. Malcolm has never shown interest in the art, beyond appreciating how it enhanced our social standing. Perfect. I'll speak to Clarence at the gallery. He can arrange a private buyer willing to provide a loan against the collection without requiring its removal from your home. By the time Olivia left through the garden gate, we had the foundations of a plan. I watched her disappear down the street, a curious sense of calm settling over me despite the circumstances. For 4 decades, I had trusted Malcolm completely, building a life, raising children, sharing everything. Now, in the space of 24 hours, that life had shattered. Yet instead of despair, I felt something unexpected, a cold, clear purpose. My husband had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. Now, I would ensure he regretted it for the rest of his life. The private investigator Olivia found was a revelation. Ms. Josephine Blackwood arrived at our agreed meeting place, a private room at the women's club I rarely frequented, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, her dark hair streaked with distinguished silver. In her mid-50s, she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to uncovering secrets. "Dame Catherine," she greeted me with a firm handshake. "Ms. Patterson explained the sensitive nature of your situation." "Please call me Catherine," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "And yes, discretion is paramount." "Always is in my line of work," she replied, removing a slim tablet from her briefcase. "Before we begin, I should clarify, I don't handle cases involving revenge or illegal activities. I'm seeking information, Ms. Blackwood. What I do with that information will remain within legal boundaries." I met her gaze steadily. "I assure you, I have no interest in criminal action, regardless of what my husband may have planned." Satisfied, she nodded. "Then, let's discuss what you need to know." For the next hour, I outlined my concerns, providing details about Malcolm's behaviors, our finances, and the life insurance policy. Josephine took notes, occasionally asking precise questions that revealed her sharp intelligence. "I'll need access to certain information," she said finally. "Phone records, credit card statements, his schedule. Can you provide those without alerting him?" "Some," I replied. "Others may be more challenging. We have separate mobile accounts, but joint credit cards. I can work with whatever you can safely obtain. For the rest, there are other methods." Her expression remained professional, but I detected a hint of something, perhaps respect, in her eyes. "Most spouses in your situation are emotional, sometimes irrational. You're remarkably composed. I've spent my career managing crises, Ms. Blackwood. This is simply another one, albeit more personal." "Call me Josephine," she said, offering a small smile. "And for what it's worth, your composure will serve you well. Emotional decisions rarely lead to successful outcomes in these scenarios." We established a secure communication protocol, an encrypted messaging app installed on a new mobile phone she provided. I would document Malcolm's activities daily, and she would provide regular updates on her findings. The investigation would focus on 3 primary areas: Malcolm's financial activities over the past 5 years, his personal associations, and any unusual purchases or behaviors that might indicate malicious intent. "What about physical evidence?" I asked. "If he is attempting to poison me, I'll need proof." "I'll arrange for sample analysis," Josephine assured me, "discreetly and through secure channels. In the meantime, take these." She handed me what appeared to be ordinary breath mint strips. "They're testing papers. If you suspect something in your food or drink, touch it with one of these. If it turns blue, don't consume it and preserve the sample for testing." As our meeting concluded, she fixed me with a serious look. "One final question, Catherine. If your suspicions prove correct, what do you intend to do?" I considered this carefully. "Justice comes in many forms, Josephine. I'm not interested in mere revenge. I want something more comprehensive." "Financial ruin?" she suggested. "That's merely a component," I replied. "I want him to lose everything he values: his reputation, his social standing, his sense of security. I want him to experience the complete dismantling of his world, just as he planned for mine." Josephine nodded, neither judging nor encouraging. "I'll provide the information. The rest will be your choice." Our second meeting that day was with Eliza Hobbs, a forensic financial solicitor recommended by Olivia's banking connections. Unlike Josephine's cool professionalism, Eliza brought an almost predatory energy to our consultation. Financial betrayal is often where spouses become most careless, she explained, reviewing the documents I'd provided. They assume their partners don't understand or monitor the details. A dangerous assumption in my case, I noted. I've managed our investment portfolio for years. Exactly why this is so interesting, Eliza said, eyes gleaming. Your husband isn't dealing with a financial innocent. Did he somehow forget your background? Malcolm has always been dismissive of my financial acumen, I explained. He considers it a hobby rather than a genuine expertise. One of his more patronizing traits. Men like that make my job easier, Eliza said with satisfaction. They leave trails. And trails there were. Within our first hour, Eliza had identified several concerning patterns in our joint accounts. Small but consistent withdrawals over the past 2 years. Investment shifts I hadn't authorized. A second credit card I'd never seen statements for. He's been building a separate financial identity, Eliza concluded. Not large enough to trigger your attention, but substantial over time. How much? Based on these patterns, I'd estimate approximately £300,000 diverted over 3 years. Not enough to significantly impact your lifestyle or joint holdings, but enough to establish a new life I finished for her. Or fund something he didn't want me to know about. Precisely. She made notes on her tablet. With your permission, I'll begin a comprehensive forensic trace. Bank accounts, property holdings, corporate structures. If he's hidden assets, I'll find them. Do it, I authorized. And I want to establish financial protection for myself immediately. Eliza shifted into action mode, outlining a strategy that would secure my personal assets without immediately alerting Malcolm. New accounts in offshore jurisdictions. Transfer of my inherited properties into a protected trust. Rerouting of my pension and investment income away from our joint holdings. What about our shared assets? I asked. That's trickier, she admitted. Any dramatic movement of joint assets could trigger notifications. However, we can gradually shift the balance of power, creating financial leverage you can deploy when ready. As we concluded our meeting, Eliza asked the question that seemed to be on everyone's mind. When do you plan to confront him? When I have everything I need, I replied. Evidence, security, and a complete understanding of what I'm facing. And if that takes months? I smiled thinly. I've spent 40 years with Malcolm. I can manage a few more months of performance. Returning home that afternoon, I felt a curious duality. Outwardly maintaining the role of Dame Catherine Weather, respected academic and devoted wife recovering from a minor illness, while inwardly becoming someone new, a strategist planning the systematic dismantling of a life built on betrayal. Malcolm returned from his golf game in high spirits, bearing flowers, an unusual gesture that now seemed sinister rather than sweet. You look better, he observed, brushing a kiss against my cheek. Perhaps you're turning the corner. Perhaps, I agreed, accepting the bouquet with a practiced smile. These are lovely. I'll put them in water. In the kitchen, I surreptitiously tested one of the blooms with Josephine's paper strip. No reaction. Just flowers. Then not everything was a weapon. At least not yet. That night, I lay awake beside my husband of 40 years, listening to his breathing, studying his face in the dim light filtering through our curtains. Who was this man, really? Had he always been capable of such calculated betrayal, or had something changed? And most troubling of all, what had I missed all these years? The investigation would provide answers. And then, when I understood the full scope of his betrayal, I would ensure Malcolm Weather learned exactly who he had underestimated. 2 weeks into our investigation, the first significant discoveries emerged. Josephine requested an urgent meeting at our secure location, arriving with an unusually serious expression. You were right to be concerned, she said without preamble, spreading photographs across the table. Malcolm has been leading a double life. The images showed Malcolm with a woman, blonde, perhaps 20 years younger than myself, attractive in a calculated way. They were dining at an upscale restaurant I didn't recognize, his hand covering hers intimately across the table. Her name is Caroline Winters, Josephine explained. 43, divorced, works in pharmaceutical sales. They've been meeting regularly for at least 2 years, based on my investigation. I studied the photographs with clinical detachment. The betrayal stung, certainly, but felt almost secondary to the larger deception. An affair is hardly surprising, given the circumstances. But it doesn't explain the life insurance policy. There's more, Josephine continued, producing additional documents. Ms. Winters has expensive tastes. In the past 2 years, she's acquired a luxury apartment in Kensington, a new Mercedes, and taken several expensive holidays, all beyond what her salary should support. Malcolm has been funding her lifestyle, I concluded. Yes, but not from the funds he's diverted from your joint accounts. Those have gone elsewhere. She slid another document forward, a property deed. He purchased this cottage in Cornwall 18 months ago, through a shell company. It's being renovated extensively, with completion scheduled for next month. I examined the photograph of the seaside property, a charming stone cottage with expansive ocean views. A retirement home? It appears so. And it's being furnished for 2, according to the invoices I've obtained. The implication was clear. Malcolm wasn't just planning for life without me. He was actively building it, creating a new beginning with his younger companion once I was gone. The timing is interesting, Josephine added. The life insurance policy was taken out 3 months before the cottage purchase. So the policy would fund their new life together, I said, the pieces falling into place. But that still doesn't confirm he's actively trying to harm me, only that he's planning for my death. That's where this becomes concerning. Josephine hesitated briefly. Catherine, have you been tested for specific toxins? My doctor ran a general blood panel. Nothing unusual appeared. Some substances don't show up in standard tests. Based on your symptoms and their intermittent nature, I consulted a toxicologist friend, hypothetically, of course. She produced a medical article. Certain plant-based compounds can create symptoms like yours without leaving obvious traces. They build up gradually in the system. I skimmed the article, my academic mind engaging despite the disturbing implications. And these wouldn't be detected without specific testing?
Correct.
They mimic natural deterioration, the kind that might be attributed to age or stress in someone of your demographic. Making my death appear natural, I concluded. No sudden event that might trigger investigation, just a gradual decline that wouldn't raise suspicions. Josephine nodded grimly. I've arranged for specialized testing if you're willing. Completely confidential, through a private laboratory with no connection to your regular medical providers. Do it, I agreed immediately. And in the meantime, I'll continue avoiding anything Malcolm prepares. Our conversation shifted to the financial investigation, where Eliza had made equally disturbing discoveries. The diverted funds, now totaling closer to £400,000, had been channeled through a complex network of accounts before disappearing into offshore holdings. He's been surprisingly sophisticated, Eliza reported when she joined our meeting. For someone supposedly uninterested in financial matters, he's created quite an intricate structure. He has a friend in banking, I recalled. George Patterson. They play golf together monthly. That explains it, Eliza nodded. He's had professional guidance. The good news is I've managed to trace most of the diverted funds. The better news is that I've implemented the protective measures we discussed. Your personal assets are now secured. How secure? Completely. I've established a trust in your name, transferred your inherited properties and investments, and created new accounts Malcolm cannot access. Approximately 60% of your total wealth is now protected. And the joint assets? That's where we've made an interesting discovery. Eliza smiled like a predator. Malcolm has been falsifying your signatures on certain documents. Not just fund transfers, but loan applications, investment changes. It's fraud, Catherine. Documented, provable fraud. The implications were significant. Financial fraud would give me substantial leverage in any divorce proceedings, potentially allowing me to claim a larger portion of our joint assets. More importantly, it would devastate Malcolm's reputation and possibly lead to criminal charges. There's something else you should know, Josephine added, exchanging glances with Eliza. Malcolm has a meeting scheduled with your family solicitor next week. We don't know the purpose, but given the timing, he's preparing for my demise. I finished, the reality settling cold and hard within me. Ensuring his legal position is secure when I'm gone. The evidence was mounting, each discovery more damning than the last. Yet without proof of active poisoning, I couldn't conclusively demonstrate that Malcolm was attempting murder rather than simply preparing for a future without me. Distasteful and betraying, certainly, but not criminal. That changed 3 days later when the specialized toxicology results arrived. Toxic levels of thallium, Josephine reported, her voice tight with controlled anger as we spoke in the secure room. Low enough to avoid detection in standard tests, high enough to cause your symptoms. With continued exposure, it would eventually cause organ failure. Fatal. Eventually, yes. And easily dismissed as natural causes in someone your age, especially with your history of mild hypertension. I absorbed this information with surprising calm. Suspecting betrayal was one thing. Confirming your husband of 40 years was actively poisoning you was quite another. Yet instead of fear or despair, I felt an icy clarity descending. We need evidence of the source, I said. Proof that Malcolm is administering it. Already arranged, Josephine assured me. I've set up surveillance in your kitchen and dining area. If he's tampering with your food or drinks, we'll document it. 2 days later, we had our answer. The surveillance footage, reviewed in Josephine's office, showed Malcolm carefully adding a powder to my evening tea, a special blend he'd been preparing for me throughout my illness, claiming it contained herbs to settle my stomach. We've tested the remaining tea in your canister, Josephine confirmed. It contains thallium compounds. Difficult to detect by taste, especially in a strong herbal blend. The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most damning. Malcolm's internet searches, recovered through forensic examination of his laptop, included queries about untraceable poisons, symptoms of thallium poisoning, and most tellingly, how long for thallium to cause death. You have everything you need, Josephine said, gathering the evidence into a secure folder. More than enough for police involvement, if that's what you want. But police involvement wasn't what I wanted. Not yet. Simple arrest and prosecution seemed insufficient for what Malcolm had attempted, the cold, calculated effort to end my life for financial gain and a new beginning with his mistress. No, I had something more comprehensive in mind, something that would dismantle every aspect of the future he'd planned, leaving him with nothing but regret and the knowledge that he had fatally underestimated his wife of 40 years. I need a few more days, I told Josephine and Eliza at our strategy meeting, to implement the final phase. They exchanged concerned glances. Catherine, Eliza began carefully, you're still at risk as long as you're in that house with him. I'm taking precautions, I assured them. No food or drink he prepares. No opportunity for him to administer anything. And I need him to believe his plan is working for just a little longer. Reluctantly, they agreed to my timeline. 3 more days to set everything in motion. 3 more days of performance, of pretending I didn't know my husband was slowly killing me. 3 more days before Malcolm Weather discovered exactly what happens when you betray Dame Catherine Weather. The final preparations moved with precision. Eliza completed the financial maneuvers we'd planned, securing my position while creating the leverage I would need. Josephine compiled all evidence into comprehensive documentation, creating multiple secure copies. And I, with Olivia's assistance, arranged the most crucial element of all, the confrontation. The setting needed to be perfect. Not our home, where Malcolm held certain advantages. Not a public place, where appearances would need to be maintained. I chose instead the university's private meeting room, ostensibly for a trustee gathering Malcolm had agreed to attend as my spouse. Everything is arranged. Olivia confirmed the morning of our planned reckoning. The room is secured, recording equipment in place. The trustees have been informed of a last-minute schedule change. And the guests. All confirmed, arriving separately, as instructed. I nodded, satisfied. And the documents? Prepared and waiting in the conference room. Everything exactly as you specified. That evening, Malcolm helped me dress for what he believed was a routine university function, solicitous as he'd been throughout my illness. I noted how carefully he avoided offering me food or drink, likely concerned about appearing suspicious after his behavior of recent weeks. "You're looking better tonight," he observed, adjusting his tie in our bedroom mirror. "Some color back in your cheeks." "I feel stronger," I replied truthfully. The treatments for thallium poisoning had been working, though I'd told Malcolm nothing about them. Perhaps I'm finally turning a corner. His expression flickered. Disappointment? Calculation? After 40 years of marriage, I had thought I could read every nuance of his face. Now I wondered if I'd ever known him at all. "Don't overdo it," he cautioned, the concerned husband to the end. "These trustee meetings can be taxing." "I'll be fine," I assured him. "Besides, you'll be with me." The drive to the university passed in comfortable silence, Malcolm occasionally reaching across to pat my hand affectionately. I allowed the contact, studying his profile in the dim car interior. He seemed relaxed, confident. A man with plans proceeding smoothly. The security guard at the university gate waved us through with a respectful nod to me. After 20 years as chancellor, I remained a recognized and respected figure on campus, even in retirement. We parked in the reserved space still maintained for my use and walked toward the administration building, Malcolm's hand supportively at my elbow. "The meeting room has been moved," I informed him as we entered the building. "Renovations in the East Wing. We're in the Chancellor's conference room tonight." He accepted this change without question, following me through familiar corridors to the imposing double doors of what had once been my domain. I paused before opening them, mentally preparing for what would follow. "Is everything all right?" Malcolm asked, noticing my hesitation. "Everything is exactly as it should be," I replied and pushed open the doors. The room beyond was not set up for a trustee meeting. Instead, a single long table dominated the space, documents arranged precisely across its polished surface. And around it sat not university trustees, but the carefully selected witnesses to Malcolm's downfall. Caroline Winters, his mistress, looking confused and alarmed. George Patterson, his banking friend, expression guarded. Our family solicitor, Thomas Barrett, professional mask firmly in place. Josephine and Eliza, positioned strategically at the far end. And finally, our 2 adult children, Elizabeth and James, their faces showing concern and bewilderment. Malcolm froze beside me, his body tensing as he processed the scene before him. "Catherine, what is this?" "Please take a seat," I said calmly, gesturing to the empty chair at the head of the table. "We have much to discuss." "I don't understand." His voice held a note of warning. "Where are the trustees?" "There was never a trustee meeting, Malcolm. Tonight is about something far more important." I moved to the opposite end of the table, standing rather than sitting. Tonight is about truth. I watched realization dawn in his eyes, followed quickly by calculation. Always the consultant, Malcolm seemed to be rapidly assessing scenarios, looking for the optimal strategy. Everyone. I addressed the room, my chancellor's voice automatically commanding attention. Thank you for coming on short notice. I've asked you here because each of you plays a role in a situation that requires clarity. Mother, Elizabeth began, concern evident. What's happening? Dad said you were ill. I have been ill, I confirmed, though not from natural causes. I gestured to Josephine, who distributed slim folders to everyone present. The documents before you explain everything. I suggest we begin with the medical evidence. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented what we had discovered. The thallium poisoning, documented with laboratory results. The surveillance footage showing Malcolm adding poison to my tea, playing on the large screen behind me. The financial trails revealing funds diverted to Caroline and the Cornwall property. The falsified signatures. The life insurance policy. As each piece of evidence was revealed, the atmosphere in the room transformed. Shock, disbelief, horror. Caroline Winters grew increasingly pale, edging her chair away from Malcolm's. George Patterson stared stonily at the table, avoiding everyone's eyes. And my children, my beloved Elizabeth and James, looked as though their world was shattering. Malcolm attempted several interruptions, each more desperate than the last. This is absurd. Catherine is unwell, delusional. These documents are fabricated. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too meticulously documented for his denials to gain traction. When I finished the presentation, a heavy silence fell over the room. Why? James finally asked, directing the question at his father. Why would you do this to Mom? Malcolm had no answer, his confident facade crumbling under the weight of exposure. I believe I can answer that, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. Your father wanted a new life, with a younger woman. I nodded toward Caroline, who flinched. With the money for my death. In a cottage by the sea, away from the memories and obligations of his life with me. I never. Caroline began, but I cut her off. You may not have known about the poisoning, Ms. Winters, but you certainly knew he was married. The expenses he lavished on you came from our joint accounts. Funds built over 40 years of marriage, including substantial amounts I earned and inherited. I turned to George Patterson. And you, George. You helped him structure the financial deceptions, knowing they were fraudulent. I wonder what the banking regulators would make of that. George blanched. Catherine, I had no knowledge of any poisoning. I thought he was planning for divorce. A distinction without much difference in terms of your professional ethics, I noted coldly. Finally, I addressed our family solicitor. Thomas, Malcolm's meeting with you next week was to prepare for my death, I presume? Ensuring all legal matters would transition smoothly. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. He requested a review of your joint will and estate planning. Given your reported illness, it seemed prudent. Indeed. I allowed my gaze to sweep the room, noting the various expressions of shock, shame, and in Malcolm's case, growing fear. Now, we come to the consequences. I nodded to Eliza, who distributed a second set of documents. These papers outline the actions already taken and those that will follow, I explained. First, financial matters. All diverted funds have been traced and will be recovered. My personal assets, comprising approximately 70% of our total wealth when properly calculated, have been secured in a trust Malcolm cannot access. Our joint assets are currently frozen pending legal proceedings. Malcolm's face had gone ashen. You can't do this. I already have, I replied simply. Furthermore, Evidence of financial fraud has been documented and will be submitted to authorities unless certain conditions are met. What conditions? Malcolm asked, the first hint of desperation entering his voice. Complete financial separation on my terms. You will sign over all claims to our joint assets and properties. You will make no claim against my pension, investments, or inheritance. You will vacate our home immediately and permanently. You're ruining me, he protested.
No, Malcolm.
I'm allowing you to avoid prison. I kept my voice level, emotion carefully controlled. The evidence of attempted murder is conclusive. If I choose to involve the police, you'll spend what remains of your life incarcerated. This alternative allows you a certain limited freedom, though not the comfortable retirement you had planned. I turned to Caroline, whose mascara had begun to smudge with silent tears. Ms. Winters, the funds Malcolm used to purchase your apartment and vehicle were obtained fraudulently. Legal proceedings will require their return. You may wish to consult your own solicitor. To George Patterson, your involvement in financial fraud will be reported to regulatory authorities unless you cooperate fully with the recovery of all diverted funds. Your banking career is likely over regardless, but your personal freedom depends on your cooperation. And finally, most painfully, to my children, Elizabeth, James, I'm deeply sorry you've been drawn into this ugliness. Your father's actions reflect on him alone, not on our family as a whole. I hope in time you can process this betrayal and find your own path forward. Malcolm, seemingly recovered from his initial shock, attempted a new strategy. This is extreme, Catherine. We can discuss this privately. Come to a reasonable arrangement. There will be no private discussion, I interrupted.
No negotiation.
The terms are non-negotiable, and they must be accepted tonight, with these witnesses present. And if I refuse? Then I contact the police immediately, and the evidence of your attempted murder is submitted in its entirety. By morning, your name and face will be in every newspaper in Britain. Respected businessman poisons wife for mistress and money. Consider how that will impact the remaining decades of your life. The silence that followed was absolute. Malcolm glanced around the table, seeing no allies, no escape routes. The careful facade he'd maintained, charming husband, doting father, pillar of the community, had completely collapsed, revealing the calculating predator beneath. You've thought of everything, he finally said, a note of bitter admiration in his voice. I learned strategic thinking from the best academic minds in the country, I replied. You should have remembered that before you decided I was expendable. Thomas Barrett, ever the solicitor, cleared his throat. If I may, the documents prepared by Mrs. Hobbs appear legally sound. I would advise Mr. Weather that contesting them would likely prove unproductive, given the circumstances. Malcolm stared at the papers before him, the full impact of his situation sinking in. Everything he had planned, the seaside retirement, the younger woman, the comfortable wealth, was evaporating before his eyes. Instead of my death bringing him freedom, my survival had brought him ruin. You're leaving me with nothing, he said, looking up at me with genuine shock. After 40 years. Not nothing, I corrected. You'll retain your personal possessions, your car, and enough funds to secure modest accommodation. Considerably more than you plan to leave me with. For a moment, something like remorse flickered across his features. Not for his actions, I suspected, but for his failure. For underestimating the woman he had lived with for 4 decades. This is your only opportunity, Malcolm, I said, my voice steady. Sign the papers now, with these witnesses present, or I make a call that ends with your arrest tonight.
He signed.
Each page, each clause, each devastating concession. His hand trembled slightly, but he signed it all, effectively erasing the life he had built and the future he had planned. As the final signature was completed, I addressed the room once more. Thank you all for your presence tonight. The documents have been witnessed and will be processed immediately. This matter is now concluded. Caroline Winters was the first to flee, unable to meet anyone's eyes as she rushed from the room. George Patterson followed shortly after, pausing only briefly to mutter an awkward apology that I acknowledged with a curt nod. Thomas Barrett gathered the signed papers with professional efficiency, assuring me they would be filed first thing in the morning. Only our children remained, stunned and silent, as the architects of their father's downfall filed out. Elizabeth approached me first, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, I had no idea. How long has this been happening?" "The poisoning began about 3 weeks ago," I answered gently. "The planning much longer." James turned to his father, disbelief hardening into anger. "How could you do this? To Mom, to us, to our family?" Malcolm had no answer, his former confidence completely shattered. He looked older suddenly, diminished, a man facing the rubble of his own making. "I think it's best if you leave now, Malcolm," I said quietly. "Your things will be packed and delivered to whatever address you provide. I suggest a hotel for tonight." He rose unsteadily, looking around the room that had witnessed his complete undoing. For a moment, he seemed about to speak, perhaps to offer some final justification or plea. But in the end, he simply nodded and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click. The confrontation I had planned so meticulously was over. The evidence presented, the consequences delivered, the separation executed with precision. I had achieved exactly what I intended: complete justice without legal entanglements, Malcolm's future destroyed by his own documented actions. Yet as I stood there with my children, absorbing the aftermath of 40 years collapsed into a single evening, I felt no triumph. Only a profound sadness for what had been lost, and a quiet, steely resolve for what would come next. "What now, Mom?" Elizabeth asked, her voice small. "Now," I said, gathering my strength, "we begin again." The days following Malcolm's exposure unfolded with mechanical precision, every contingency anticipated, every detail managed. Malcolm vacated our home that night, sending a brief text with an address for his belongings. Eliza's team processed the legal documents with remarkable efficiency. By the end of the week, our financial separation was complete, our divorce proceedings initiated on grounds that would remain private unless Malcolm contested any provision. He didn't. Whatever fight had animated him through decades of marriage and weeks of poisoning seemed to have evaporated completely in that conference room. He made no contact, sought no reconciliation, offered no further explanation. It was as if Malcolm Weather had simply ceased to exist, replaced by a ghost who signed required documents and otherwise disappeared from my life. For the first time in 40 years, I slept alone in the home we had shared, no longer needing to check my food or feign illness. The thallium had begun to clear from my system, my strength returning gradually with proper treatment. Physical recovery would take time, but it would come. The emotional landscape was less certain. Olivia visited frequently, her practical support and unwavering loyalty a balm during the adjustment. "You should be proud," she told me over tea one afternoon, a week after the confrontation. "Most people in your situation would have fallen apart. I haven't had that luxury," I replied, though in truth, I had experienced moments of profound grief in private, not for the man who had tried to murder me, but for the 4 decades of shared history that now seemed like an elaborate deception. My children processed the revelation in their own ways. Elizabeth threw herself into ensuring my well-being, visiting daily, coordinating with my doctors, researching toxin recovery protocols. James retreated briefly, then returned with quiet, steady support and practical assistance managing the logistics of dismantling a 40-year marriage. Neither had contact with their father, a decision they made independently. "I can't face him yet," Elizabeth explained. Maybe someday, but not now. James was more definitive. He stopped being my father the moment he decided to kill my mother. I encouraged them to process their feelings without pressure. Your relationship with your father is separate from mine, I told them. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Josephine requested a meeting. We met at my home, now cleansed of Malcolm's presence, his clothes, personal items, and even photographs removed and placed in storage. I've been monitoring Malcolm as requested, she reported, accepting the tea I offered. He's currently in a service department in Knightsbridge. Expensive for his reduced circumstances, but presumably temporary. And Caroline Winters? No contact since the confrontation. She's listed her apartment for sale and taken leave from her position. Preparing to relocate, it appears. I nodded, unsurprised. Caroline had been a willing participant in an affair, but the poisoning had clearly shocked her. No doubt she feared legal implications, or at minimum, social consequences once the story inevitably circulated. There's something else, Josephine continued, her expression carefully neutral. Malcolm attempted to access the Cornwall property yesterday. He was informed by the estate agent that ownership had been transferred and he no longer had rights to the property. A small, cold satisfaction flickered within me. The Cornwall cottage, Malcolm's planned paradise with his mistress, had been among the assets recovered in our settlement. I had arranged its immediate sale, the proceeds directed to a foundation supporting victims of domestic abuse. How did he react? I asked, curious despite myself. Not well, according to my source. There was a scene. Security was called. Josephine hesitated. Catherine, I need to ask, what are your intentions regarding the criminal evidence? The question had been inevitable. The evidence of Malcolm's poisoning attempt remained secured but unfiled with authorities, a sword of Damocles suspended by my discretion alone. For now, I'm maintaining it as leverage to ensure his complete compliance with our separation terms, I replied. Beyond that, I haven't decided. Josephine nodded, understanding the strategy. Just be aware that there may be statutes of limitations to consider, depending on how you ultimately wish to proceed.
I'm aware, y assured her.
At present, ensuring my financial and personal security takes precedence. In truth, I had been wrestling with this question daily. Did I want Malcolm prosecuted? Imprisoned? The evidence would certainly support such an outcome. Justice, in the most traditional sense, demanded it. Yet something held me back. Not mercy, certainly, but perhaps a different calculus of justice and consequence. That evening, I sat in my study reviewing the final asset division reported by Eliza. Malcolm had been left with his personal possessions, his car, and approximately 5% of our former joint wealth, enough to live modestly, but not comfortably. His social standing, professional reputation, and family connections were effectively destroyed. The future he had planned with Caroline was shattered beyond repair. Was it enough? The question haunted me as I closed the financial reports and moved to the window, watching darkness settle over the garden Malcolm had never shown interest in but that I had nurtured for decades. The roses were blooming particularly well this year, their fragrance occasionally reaching me even through the closed window. My phone rang, breaking my contemplation. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. Dame Catherine Weather speaking, I answered, my professional tone automatic. Catherine. Malcolm's voice, rough and unfamiliar. Please don't hang up. I remained silent, neither agreeing nor refusing. I need to ask you something, he continued, words slightly slurred. Why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you have me arrested? It was the first time we had spoken since the confrontation. Would you prefer that option? It remains available.
No.
God, no. He exhaled shakily. I just don't understand. You had everything you needed to put me away for decades. Why this instead? I considered my answer carefully. Prison would have been simpler, perhaps, but it would have ended things too quickly. This way, you live with the consequences. You wake up every day knowing what you lost, what you attempted, and how completely you failed. That's cruel, he whispered. Crueler than poison in my tea? I asked mildly. Crueler than planning my death while sleeping beside me for 40 years? He had no answer for that. Was any of it real? I asked suddenly, the question escaping before I could contain it. Any of the 40 years? The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, his voice returned, smaller somehow. Most of it. In the beginning, all of it. When did I become disposable to you, Malcolm? Another long pause. I don't know. It happened gradually, then suddenly. You were so accomplished, so respected. I became peripheral. So you decided to kill me? The calmness of my voice surprised even me. It wasn't like that. Not at first. Caroline was she made me feel important again. The way you used to, before you became Dame Catherine, before everyone wanted a piece of you. It was a pathetic justification, yet I found myself listening, curious about the mental architecture that had allowed my husband to transform from life partner to would-be murderer. The insurance policy was George's suggestion, he continued. Just planning for the future, he said. But once it existed, possibilities opened up. Things I hadn't considered before. Like thallium in my tea. He made a sound, half sob, half laugh. Do you know the irony? I researched for weeks to find something untraceable, sophisticated. In the end, I was caught by simple kitchen surveillance. The powerful often underestimate the seemingly powerless, I observed. You forgot who I was, Malcolm. Who I've always been. Another long silence followed, heavy with 4 decades of history distilled to this final, fractured exchange. What happens now? He finally asked. Now you live with what you've done. I replied simply. As will I. Will you ever tell people about what I tried to do? I considered this. The question of public exposure had been part of my calculation from the beginning. Malcolm feared it above all else, the respected businessman revealed as a calculating poisoner. That depends entirely on you, I decided. Maintain absolute compliance with our agreement, and your secret remains between those who were in that room. Deviate in any way, and I release everything, the footage, the lab results, the financial trail. Your name becomes synonymous with your crimes. I understand, he said quietly. Good night, Malcolm. I ended the call without waiting for his response. Setting down the phone, I moved to the bookshelves that lined my study. 40 years of collected volumes, literature, academic works, photography books from our travels. Among them stood several photo albums I hadn't yet removed. I selected one at random, opening to images from 30 years ago. Malcolm and I on a beach in Greece, laughing into the camera. Malcolm holding baby Elizabeth while James, then a toddler, clutched his leg. Had it all been genuine then? Had he loved me once, before resentment and entitlement corrupted that love? Perhaps it didn't matter anymore. The past couldn't be rewritten, only interpreted through the harsh lens of the present. I closed the album and returned it to the shelf. Tomorrow would begin my new life, one without Malcolm, without the certainty of a shared future, without the foundation I'd built my existence upon for 4 decades. But also a life without poison in my tea, without betrayal disguised as care, without the slow murder of body and trust. A fair exchange, all things considered. The Cornwall cottage looked different in person than it had in photographs. Smaller, perhaps, but with a charm that transcended size. Weathered stone warmed by afternoon sunlight, gardens tumbling with native wildflowers, the rhythmic percussion of waves against the cliffs below. I stood on the terrace, breathing air untainted by London pollution or painful memories. The property had come full circle, purchased by Malcolm for his post-murder life with Caroline, transferred to me in our settlement, sold to benefit domestic abuse survivors, and now, through an unexpected chain of events, leased to me for the summer. The new owners were delighted when I inquired on your behalf, Olivia had explained. Apparently they're overseas until autumn and were hoping to find a trustworthy tenant. The coincidence had seemed too perfect to ignore, a symbolic reclaiming of something Malcolm had intended to enjoy after my death. So here I stood, very much alive, claiming 3 months of seaside serenity as part of my own renewal. The past year had unfolded with unexpected momentum. The divorce had finalized without contest, Malcolm accepting every term rather than risk the evidence of his attempted murder becoming public. My health had recovered fully, the last traces of thallium finally cleared from my system. And most remarkably, I had discovered a life beyond the scaffolding of my 40-year marriage, one rich with work, friendship, family, and previously unexplored possibilities. I had accepted a part-time position advising an educational foundation, using my experience as chancellor to help expand academic opportunities for disadvantaged students. I had reconnected with friends neglected during my marriage, discovering how many genuine connections remained available to me. I had developed new routines, new interests, new ways of moving through the world as myself rather than as half of a long-established pair. My children had found their equilibrium as well. Elizabeth, after months of therapy, had cautiously re-established limited contact with Malcolm. Monthly lunches, carefully structured, focused primarily on maintaining some vestige of father-daughter connection. James remained estranged, his anger still too raw for reconciliation. I supported both their choices without judgment, recognizing the complexity of their position. As for Malcolm himself, I had minimal direct knowledge of his circumstances. Josephine, whose services I had retained on a reduced basis, provided occasional updates. He had found employment with a former colleague's firm, a significant step down from his previous position, but respectable work. He had moved from the expensive service department to a modest flat in Clapham. His social life appeared limited to occasional golf games with a dwindling circle of friends. Caroline Winters had indeed relocated, accepting a position with a pharmaceutical company in Manchester, as far from London and Malcolm as professional opportunity allowed. According to Josephine's sources, there had been no contact between them since the night of the confrontation. The criminal evidence remained secured but unfiled, my insurance policy against any attempt by Malcolm to rewrite our history or contest our settlement. I had decided, after much reflection, that traditional justice via the criminal courts was not my priority. Malcolm's current existence, diminished, isolated, haunted by his failure, seemed punishment enough for a man whose primary motivations had been greed and ego. A gull cried overhead, drawing my attention back to the present moment, the terrace, the cottage, the sea stretching to the horizon. I had brought work with me, manuscripts to review for the foundation, but found myself increasingly drawn to simply being present in this place, absorbing its quiet beauty. Tea on the terrace, Dame Catherine? My temporary housekeeper, Mrs. Penrose, appeared at the French doors, a tray balanced in her capable hands. "That would be lovely, thank you," I replied, settling into one of the weather-worn Adirondack chairs. As she arranged the tea service on the small table, loose Darjeeling, brewed exactly as I preferred, I found myself reflecting on the symmetry of this moment. Tea, once the vehicle of Malcolm's poison, now represented simple comfort in this place he had prepared for my absence. Mrs. Penrose departed, leaving me with my thoughts and the endless sea. I poured the tea carefully, still maintaining the habit of examining food and drink before consumption, despite knowing no threat remained. Some cautions once learned are not easily abandoned. My phone chimed with a message. Elizabeth, sending photos of her children playing in her London garden. My grandchildren had become a particular joy in this new chapter, their uncomplicated love a reminder of life's continuity despite profound disruption. As I typed a reply, another message arrived. From James this time, confirming his planned visit next weekend. My son had been especially protective since Malcolm's betrayal, checking in daily, arranging his schedule to include regular time together. This Cornwall visit would be our first significant holiday together in years. I set the phone aside and lifted my teacup, watching sunlight dance across the surface of the liquid. 1 year ago, such a simple action had been potentially lethal. Now it represented one of life's small pleasures, reclaimed along with so much else. The local village church bells chimed the hour, the sound carrying clearly across the headland. 4 o'clock. In my previous life, this would have been when Malcolm returned from his office, expecting his evening whiskey and a sympathetic ear for his professional complaints. A routine maintained for decades, unquestioned until it became the framework for my intended death. Now 4 o'clock meant nothing particular, just another hour in a day structured entirely by my own preferences. Freedom I hadn't known I was missing until it found me through the most unexpected and painful of paths. That evening, as twilight settled over the cottage, I sat at the small writing desk by the window, composing responses to the foundation proposals I'd been reviewing. Work that engaged my mind and served a purpose beyond myself, a reminder that at 65, I remained capable of meaningful contribution. A text message interrupted my concentration. An unfamiliar number, but the content made the sender immediately clear. I drove past the cottage today. Saw your car in the drive. Fitting that you're there instead of me. Perhaps justice after all.
M.
I stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions rising. Malcolm must have been checking on his lost paradise, never expecting to find me in residence. The message contained no threat, no request, no clear purpose beyond acknowledgement of the irony. After considerable thought, I typed a simple reply. The view is beautiful. The air is clean. The tea is safe. I pressed send, then blocked the number. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to hear. Malcolm had made his choices, as had I. Our paths, entwined for 40 years, had diverged completely and permanently. Later, standing at the bedroom window overlooking moonlight on water, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. From chancellor to threatened wife to architect of justice, roles I had never anticipated when saying my wedding vows 4 decades earlier. The woman who had accepted Malcolm's ring had been accomplished but conventional, believing in partnerships built on trust and shared futures. The woman now watching moonlight on Cornish waves had learned harder truths, that decades of intimacy provide no guarantee against betrayal, that conventional justice may not satisfy unconventional wounds, that beginning again at 65 is difficult but far preferable to being poisoned at 64. I had lost a husband but found myself. Lost certainty but gained agency. Lost a planned future but gained an unexpected present. As I prepared for bed in what would have been Malcolm's seaside sanctuary, I felt no triumph, no vindication, no pleasure in his downfall. Only a quiet certainty that justice had indeed been served, not through courts or prisons, but through the elegant mechanism of consequence. Malcolm had tried to erase me from existence. Instead, he had erased himself from mine. In the most literal sense, I had survived him, and in surviving, ultimately thrived. If you found yourself captivated by Dame Catherine's story of intellectual revenge and personal resurrection, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more psychological thrillers that explore the darker sides of relationships and the triumph of cleverness over cruelty. Hit the like button and turn on notifications to never miss our weekly uploads of revenge stories, where justice is served through wit rather than violence. Share your thoughts in the comments below about how you would have handled such a betrayal. Would you have chosen Dame Catherine's path of calculated consequences, or taken a different route to justice? Join our community of strategic thinkers who know that the most satisfying revenge isn't always the most obvious one.